Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to kick it off with just a quick question about your background, a little bit about the company you built, what is it doing, who is it targeting, and so on. Maybe Brad, do you want to start?
Sure, and thanks for hosting this great event, by the way. Brad Birnbaum, CEO of Kustomer. I consider myself a serial entrepreneur, founded 5 startups over the years, had some great exits over the years, including one to Salesforce, another to Meta. And Kustomer, my current company, we are revolutionizing customer support experiences. So we've been doing it for about 9 years now. We've had a really interesting journey in that we were actually acquired by Meta and divested out. So for those who want to talk to me about that later, I got some great stories on that one. But we are, couldn't be more excited to be taking advantage of the AI revolution in customer support because it's pretty magical what we're able to do and how the industry is transforming.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right, I think we can do a little better than that. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, thank you. So I'll spare you the boring professional background, but one thing we always like to do when we have the opportunity to address a group like this is go down memory lane and share a little bit about the why behind the work that we do here at Susu. And for myself and my co-founder, Mimo, Susu really stemmed from our personal experiences as immigrants. My family immigrated from New Delhi, India to the United States of America. And like many immigrants, we came here and we thought we made it and everything was going to be okay. And as some of you might know, that's actually very far from the truth. And my father was actually mugged on his first day in the country. We didn't really have much by way of shelter. And those experiences really set the tone for a lot of my early childhood, where I just watched my parents work miracles without a credit score and with limited financial resources, but still do everything they could possibly do to try to create a better life for us. And the thought I was left with was, it shouldn't be so hard for people putting their best foot forward every day to have a fighting chance. And so inspired by that and my co-founders' experiences, we built Susu on this premise that no matter where you come from, your financial identity or the color of your skin, it should never determine where you end up in life. And more practically, the way we achieve that is we partner with owners and operators of real estate, and we make sure that when people pay their rent, that goes towards helping them build credit. So the same way that a mortgage owner pays their mortgage, they build credit, we do that for renters, and we built around it additional financial literacy and financial coaching supportive services.
Tim?
Great. Well, appreciate everyone taking the time here. My name is Tim Hwang, founder and CEO at Fiscal Note. I guess prior to starting Fiscal Note, I was actually spent a ton of time in politics, working originally for Senator Obama back in 2007, joined the White House in 2008, and doing something really dumb, of course, personally, and running for political office in 2009. Much to my surprise, people actually voted for me. I got elected in Maryland, served on the Board of Education at the age of 18, and pretty fun job, but ended up leaving that job because I saw an opportunity essentially to build Fiscal Note from scratch. And essentially what Fiscal Note is we are the Bloomberg terminal for law, essentially allowing people to look up legislation, regulations, court cases from 90 different countries around the world. And we today help about 5,000 companies, government agencies, ranging from the DoD, the FBI, the CIA, the Federal Reserve, every single member of the House and the Senate, as well as the White House, and about half the Fortune 500 and their general counsel's offices currently use Fiscal Note to monitor laws, regulations, diplomatic efforts, trade, compliance, whatever the case is, around the world. A company went public actually in the New York Stock Exchange about 2 years ago, and currently there's about 1,200 employees around the world today working at Fiscal Note today.
Thank you so much for the backgrounds and introductions. For today's panel, I was thinking on what could be the most valuable, especially for the startups who are here today, to hear from you guys. So I really thought that it would be very insightful to hear kind of your experiences on building a business from scratch, scaling it to a unicorn status and beyond. So maybe my first question is about fundraising and funding and attracting funding in general. How did you, in each of your particular companies, how did you approach fundraising? What was the kind of key learnings through that? What type of investors should startups kind of stay away from? Were there any specific learnings or things that really pan out for you guys during that process? Brad, do you want to start?
Sure. So first off, I view fundraising like dating. I often say that to investors. I've always historically been fundraising when I didn't need money. We were getting to know people, aka the dating, right? And building those relationships over time so that when it was time to fundraise, I already knew who I thought would be a good partner for us. And frankly, they knew if they were interested in us. So it was a really quick phone call. I'm really fortunate that Kustomer had a great experience fundraising. In the, from 2015 to 2019, we raised $174 million from some of the best, and including our friends at Plug and Play. So thank you. It was also a crazy time. Like in 2019, I had 3 rounds. I did Series C, D, and E, which was a little kooky, right? We didn't need to. I mean, honestly, when we sold to Meta, I dividended out probably like 140 million of that back to my investors of that money we raised. So like, we didn't need to fundraise, but it was in some ways it was the barometer back then. I don't think it's the barometer now anymore. I don't view it as such. I actually think I view fundraising a little differently than I did back then, and it's like now I think companies are trying to run much more fiscally responsible and frankly fundraise a little more fiscally responsible as well. But my advice to people on it is it takes a lot of time. It's invest the time to get to know the investor community, to figure out who's going to be your right partner, and most importantly, who you want on the journey. As I said earlier, like I was really fortunate to have great people on the journey with me. We went through some very interesting experiences selling to Meta. It was not easy. And I was surrounded by some really amazing people who, in the middle of COVID, we were doing midnight phone calls all the time. We used to have joke, we'd all gather around the fires at night, and do it. But you really need to be surrounded by great people. And when we redivested out, I went back to, some of the same original base because they were just so great for me in helping me build the business. And find the partners that will challenge you, not the ones that are going to leave you alone. That is my advice to you. They will make you better.
Great question. And Brad, I actually agree with a lot of what you shared there. But just to paint some context, I'd say at Susu, we've had sort of the range of fundraising experience. So our first round of fundraising was in like formal fundraising, not sort of like small angel checks, was in 2019. And that round took us about 18 months to raise $1.6 million. We had 326 people say no to us, not that I am counting. Fortunately, Plug and Play was somebody who said yes to us. So in terms of investors to go to, they're number 1 on the list. But on the flip side, we've also had the experience of raising $130 million in 6 weeks. And really, I think every fundraising round changes a little bit in terms of where you are as a business, where the market is, who the investors are. And, I think this audience is a little more on the earlier stage as far as entrepreneurs go. And you just got to, in addition to the relational elements that Brad touched on, treat it like any other sales process, right? You put together a list of people that you think are relevant to what you're doing, that have a good track record, that are reputed. You start finding ways to build a relationship with them, and you sort of track the progress against that. And then at the same time, you want to be actually building genuine relationships. It's not super transactional. You want to also invest in people and get to know them. And on that note, what I would say is you really want to make sure that the people you choose to be on your cap table are people that you want on your cap table on a good day, but also a bad day. Right. And when the market's hot and it's frothy, everyone seems great and everyone wants to invest and everyone wants to be there. But when things hit the fan, which they inevitably do when you're building a company, you want someone that you feel comfortable going to and saying, here's a problem, here's an issue, something in our business that we thought was going to work out XYZ isn't working out that way. And you want that person to roll up their sleeves and help you solve that problem, not to be just wasting your time with like data requests that don't make sense or being less helpful than actually value add. Right. And so that's really where it counts. Everyone is a great investor on a good day. I would caution anyone who's raising money to think about, do I want this person to be with me in the trenches on a bad day? And that takes some foresight, that takes some intentionality. And you need to remember as a founder, you have something to offer too, which is a piece of your business. Right. And so I think early on, it's so easy to be like, whoever will give me money, I'll take that money. And that's when you need to kind of like check yourself a little bit and be like, hey, this is a long journey. It's like a marriage. So do I really want to be in this with this person, with this company, with this firm in good days and bad days?
I would say, I definitely resonate with a lot of the comments that were made earlier. I guess one thing that I always think about when fundraising is that fundraising is not a function of, it's not a individual process that exists outside of your business. So the reality is that if you're doing extremely well, fundraising is actually going to be a lot easier than you think it is. And the reason why is because there's a ton of investors, and there's actually not that many great companies that are doing extremely well at that time period. And so if you're doing well, if you're increasing revenues, your gross margins are high, you've got recurring revenue, you've got a stable stream of business that continues to compound in the future, investors will be knocking down on your door to get a piece of your business. And the reason why is because at the end of the day, what is the job of an investor? So what job of an investor is, they take a step back. They're going out there raising their money from family offices, sovereign wealth funds, from large pension funds and the like, and they're hunting for good companies to invest in. That is the reason why they get up in the morning, why they go to work, why they go to the office, why they talk to so many different companies, is because they are hunting for great companies. And so the best thing you can do to maximize your success of fundraising is to build a great company, and build a great product that a lot of customers want to use, have great unit economics that drive good long-term profitability, have a great business in a really growing market segment. And the rest of the fundraising is actually surprisingly pretty easy. And so I think that maybe the second sort of aspect to this is, a lot of what was said around the sales process, right? So there are many, many, many different types of investors. There's marketplace investors, there's crypto investors, there's B2B investors, consumer investors. If you are a founder with a limited amount of time and you're trying to raise a Series A for an enterprise SaaS company, do not waste your time talking to crypto investors or talking to fintech investors or talking to consumer investors. They may love your business. They may have an incredible hypotheses around it. But if their fund mandate is out of what you're investing for, or if their stage is not a good fit, it is a complete waste of your time. And so spending time working your business, refining your pipeline, and then really making sure that the people you're talking to are a good fit. Obviously, that's just sort of the basics, I would say, of fundraising for sure.
Thanks for the insights. Definitely a lot of things resonate, and glad to hear that. Glad to hear those good words about plug and play as well. Of course, after the fundraising, the company starts to build a company and hire developers and other staff. So I did want to ask a question about hiring process. Of course, in early stages, those key early hires are very crucial for any company to survive, to grow in the right direction. So how did you find the key early hires in your company? Was it inbound, outbound? What type of creative ways or what type of characteristics were you looking for in those early applicants when you were hiring? Maybe Tim, do you want to start?
Yeah, so this was maybe like 10 years ago when we first started. So you'll have to excuse my my references. But I think one of the things we did was, so we started this company when we were very, very young. I mean, literally we were 21 years old, 20 years old, as three co-founders, and we're just trying to get the company off the ground. And we did two things, well, I guess three things. The first thing is we looked in our peer network first, right? Obviously, looking for engineers or software engineers in particular, but also business development folks that we had sort of gone to school with or had known very, very closely. But at some point, your network maxes out from there, right? So the second thing that we did was we just, we basically put out a bunch of job descriptions on LinkedIn and on AngelList. And so I remember scrolling through thousands and thousands of resumes on AngelList and just kind of filtering through the individuals. But I think here's where it gets really interesting is once you raise your Series A or Series B, and you start tapping out your sort of natural networks, your job as a founder is to go recruit the best team that you can get. And I would describe, the startup game in sort of a series of very small, or I guess a series of large scale transactions you need to do, right? So, as a founder, you trade your time for equity. As a VC, you trade your capital for equity. And then obviously when you exit the business, that strategic is paying their cash for whatever the value of the business is, right? So in those series of transactions, what happens when you actually take the capital? Well, I can tell you directly that 85 to 90% of the capital that you raise is going to go towards hiring people. It's literally your payroll cost, right? So then you ask, okay, well, you look in TechCrunch or The Information or Wall Street Journal, whatever, and you see, sometimes you scratch your head and say, how do companies blow so much money so quickly, right? So how do they raise like hundreds of millions of dollars and then just blow out their businesses and then end up, having to shut down their companies. I can tell you exactly how it is because they hire the wrong people. When 90% of your operating expenses go straight towards hiring people, the way that you blow out your OpEx and you burn through a ton of cash is basically hiring the wrong people. And so your number one job as a founder is the moment that cash hits the bank is to go build the best team possible and make sure that they're extremely efficient at doing two things, right? The first thing is building a great product. And the second thing is getting that in the hands of your target customers. Everything else is sort of a distraction basically from those two things in terms of building the right team to be able to accomplish those two goals.
Anything to add?
I mean, I think Tim covered a lot of ground there, but I would say this could be its own panel. I think the most significant mistakes I've ever made as a founder are in hiring by far. Nothing I have done, no mistake I've ever made has been as poorly impactful to the business than hiring the wrong people. And so I just want to double click the importance of getting the right people in the right seats. It's not about how fast, it's really about how well. There's a framework that we use to think about sort of talent, or at least I use, where everyone can be on one spectrum a missionary and on another spectrum a mercenary. And as you grow, that person sort of fits differently on that spectrum. So early on, you're looking to hire people that kind of fit a little more in the missionary category. They really are connected to your mission, their vision, and they're just willing to work hard, be scrappy, figure things out, duct tape things together. And they don't have to be subject matter experts in everything other than maybe some very highly technical roles. As you grow, though, you realize that you need real industry expertise and competence in every single position. And so your hiring profile shifts for someone who indexes more on sort of, I care about the mission, I'm hardworking, I'm willing to figure things out, to here's my prior experience, here's what I've done, here's my track record. Because when you're growing, sort of quote unquote hyper growth, you need people who can get in seat and start executing on day one, right? Everyone's going to take a little bit of time to ramp, but you need to reduce that ramp time. And the best way to do that is hire for experience. And so your hiring profile really changes a lot. The second thing I would say is, once again, like hire slower than you need to. Don't feel the need to hire quickly. Don't read a TechCrunch article and see that someone hired 500 people in 6 months and feel like, oh, great, I need to go hire a bunch of people. Because the cost of one bad employee is 10 good ones, right? Like if you have the wrong person, it not only is negatively impacting that role, but they make everyone else around their jobs harder. And so it starts to have a really detractive effect on culture. And so the best way to solve for that is actually just hire the right person. In real estate, you make your money on the price that you buy at. Same way, in hiring, you got to make the right decision up front. You can performance people out, you can coach them, you can grow them, but if you make the wrong decision up front, it's going to be way, way, way harder. And at the same time, you're trying to grow, right? And so every hour that you could spend coaching someone is an hour that you're taking away from actually growing your business. So my recommendation in terms of hiring the right people, make sure the process takes some time, make sure there's multiple rounds, do reference checks, reference check beyond who they give you. Everyone can find two people who love them and will say good things. Do backdoor references and really find out who they are and if they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And that's going to get really important once you run out of the people you know. So those are a couple thoughts. The last thing I'd say is I actually don't hire people I know anymore. Early on, we thought that it'd be great to hire people we know because there's trust and we like working together. And I just find that it ends up creating more problems than it's worth. Maybe at the beginning it's inevitable, but over time I found hiring people you know ends up ruining the relationship you had with them in some way, shape, or form. And it just creates additional complexity. Did they get the role because they know you? Did they get the role because they're competent? When people do stupid things, it's really a lot harder if it's someone you know, and people will do stupid things. That's just human nature. And so, once you get past the early stages, I encourage people to be really thoughtful about hiring people they know.
Yeah, on that note, when friends often come to me for a job, I say, I can't hire you because I can't fire you.
Yep.
So like, speaking to the importance of hiring, as CEO, I feel like I have three core focuses: making sure the company has a great strategy for now and into the future, make sure the company has the resources to execute on it, and building the appropriate team. So echoing what's been said of our team building is one of the most important things probably for all of us at Stable. And the bigger you get, the more important it becomes, not less. As for the teams that you build, especially in the early days, yeah, you do pull from your networks. You have to. I would encourage similar sentiments of hiring slower and more deliberate than you think, because the wrong hire takes it's at least a 6-month process of making, the wrong hire. Generally, it takes a few months to onboard, a few months to realize, and generally, if you do the right things, performance management, and try to help as best you can, it's at least a 6-month process. So it's pretty impactful to the business, the wrong hire. So we do try to be as deliberate as we can as we grow, but it's also hard on a rapidly growing business because you need people to execute when the business is growing. So it's a really fine balance. Have a good process. We have a consistent and fair process. It's something that we've standardized very early on, that we have a very consistent interview panel for different roles. Similar questions are asked to make sure that we are being, appropriate and fair. I agree on the references, critically important. And I would say, as hard as it is, take your time and be very deliberate in your hiring.
Thanks for that. After scaling these businesses and, of course, going through all of this process of, building this technology, hiring the right people, maybe having some mistakes along the way through the hiring process, have there been any notable obstacles that you guys have run into, and how did you overcome? Maybe there's a specific story that comes to mind of something that you guys faced as a company and were able to overcome. Samir, maybe you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to kick off on this one. I think I almost feel like the question is, what obstacle did we not run into? Might be better, but just for a fun story, when we raised our first round of financing, I mentioned, we had a lot of people say no to us, but didn't really mention our personal circumstances at the time, which was my co-founder and I were both $100,000 in debt, had no health insurance. I met my wife at that time. She wasn't really excited by our first date, learning about my financial situation, but we overcame that. And resultantly, we closed our first customer, the University of Minnesota, and we flew out to go speak with them, but we actually didn't have enough money for a hotel room. And so instead of actually staying at a hotel room, we're like, we're going to find a great 24-hour establishment. And at the time, we're in Fargo, North Dakota. And so we end up going to a Denny's and deciding, hey, a Grand Slam's only $5.99. I think I can afford this. And we're just going to work through the night, not fall asleep, and then figure out where we're going next. And unfortunately, we're not superhuman. So at some point, we fell asleep. And the store manager very kindly came up to us and was sort of like, hey, guys, a lot of people try to sleep at Denny's. We're going to need to kick you out. And it's like negative 20 degrees. You have to beg this guy, can you please just let us call a cab to the airport or something, which he does. We get to the airport. There's this 70-year young lady in a massage chair, and she looks at us and she's just like, I think you guys need this more than I do. And she gets up and lets us sit there. That was definitely a low point. But then the next day we flew out to Silicon Valley. We're like 5 houses away from Mark Zuckerberg, and tried to raise money for our seed round, which we eventually closed at $1.6 million, right? And I always reflect on that experience, one, because I love Denny's, but two, because it just reminds you of the power of persistence and proximity and not giving up. And that's how we've solved any problem we've ran into, right? Like the nature of being an entrepreneur is being unreasonably optimistic. You think that you can do things that by nature are seemingly impossible, and you figure out a way to do it. And that's really the foundation. And then every single problem has its own tactical solution, but it's really that spirit of persistence, believing in something bigger than yourself and figuring out a way to bring it to life. And that's something we try to instill across the company.
Brad, Tim, anything?
Was it more around hiring or just general business problem?
General business problem.
I mean,
it can be anything.
For me, my big one is, everybody thinks that startups are just a straight shot up, right? Trajectory just. I won't find you a single one for the most part that didn't have more than a few speed bumps. And even though Kustomer had a great trajectory, I mean, raised a lot of money, sold to Meta in 2020, like, great trajectory. We had more than our share of speed bumps. And frankly, we were what I'd call a late bloomer, right? So like when we started in 2015, we were able to raise, great seed money. My co-founder had a great track record, a bunch of previous exits, and, we know the space really well. But we put off a lot, right? We said we want to be the next Salesforce. We want to build a platform as robust as Salesforce. And well, guess what? That takes a lot of time, right? Despite us being, pretty good at what we do, it takes a lot of time. So we didn't enter market for almost 2 years because we knew what we wanted to build was robust, scalable, enterprise worthy. And we almost ran out of money, actually. The business, right? We actually had to do a bridge from our A to our B, and that really shook the employees. Like, they didn't understand that, right? Like they just all thought like startups are up and to the right, and there's no speed bumps along the way. And again, I had great investors along the way who helped me. Of course, the bridge really, frankly, helped them because we did have a strong exit, but people didn't understand that at the time. And, my advice to everybody is it is not a straight shot up. There is going to be a whole bunch of speed bumps along the way. There's going to be a lot of hard decisions along the way. It's going to be a lot of, unhappy people from time to time along the way. It's really hard to please everybody, and it's really hard for everybody to understand what you're going through as a leader, as a founder of the company, right? That like they sometimes don't understand all the decisions, and you just have to do what you think is right and best at that time with the information you got in front of you.
I guess I've got sort of similar stories to the rest of the panel here, but so there's so many things that are just so hard about building a company. And it's hard to describe, but the thing that I always tell people is like, if you've ever seen the movie The Social Network, and like by minute 12 they're like coding in a dorm room, and then you fast forward 6 minutes and it's like minute 18 of the movie, and now they're in this like gigantic office with like 2,000 people and really fancy conference rooms and stuff. I don't really understand, because those 6 minutes are basically the entirety of how hard it is. And in those 6 minutes, I would imagine it's just years and years and years of grinding. It's just, it's the Friday 3 a.m. PowerPoint presentation I have to finish to get on a flight the next day to, speak at some conference. And then, you're giving up some birthday dinner on Sunday because you have to go fly to, Minneapolis to go pitch some customer, or whatever the case is. It's just like years and years and years and years of that. And then occasionally you get this sort of the sort of sudden death moments, if you will. In our case, I would say like in 2014, 2015, I had maybe 15 or 20 employees sitting around a table, and classic startup story. We had a Series A term sheet pull out from us literally like a week before closing, and then I literally had the definitive document sitting in my inbox. And I'd sit down with my employees and say, hey, look, we've got 6 weeks of runway left, and we basically have to pull together a bridge essentially to get the company through. And so in those types of situations, I mean, sitting down with employees, talking to them one-on-one, explaining the situation, from a founder perspective, having the sort of steel-eyed face of like everything's going to be okay, but on the back end, you're sort of freaking out and trying to pull everything together. I mean, I would say that the founder kind of story of building companies is so emotionally draining and challenging that it's just a very you just have to sort of learn to deal with it on a consistent basis. And so and that's not just with fundraising. I mean, just with everything. I remember one other story. Our company's headquarters was in DC. We set up our New York office for the first time. Of course, lo and behold, me, the first time founder, 2-3 years into my job, hire the wrong managing director of our New York office. He goes off and hires like 30 people, and they all resign in 9 months. And so then you have to go relocate up to New York. With my co-founder, we have to rebuild the entire office from scratch. I mean, that's like the type of stuff that you have to do, on a consistent basis. And so I would say like, the only thing I would say about the challenges of running the hard challenge of running a company is just that you probably will make a mistake, and you sort of have to, pick yourself up, learn from the mistake, and just kind of get to the next stage from there.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing those super interesting stories. I think innovation plays a key role in any business. And of course, you as startup founders, you started with an innovative solution, but how do you guys as a company continuously innovate on your existing products? Do you have certain practices? Do you have certain internal hackathons, or what is kind of the approach in each of your companies? Brad, do you want to start?
Sure. We from time to time do the hackathons, but the problem is the hackathon stuff never sees the light of day, which always frustrates me. Like, you guys built something amazing in a weekend, and like, oh, it'll take like 8 months to get that out with security reviews and SOC 2 compliance and HIPAA this and all that fun stuff. So I'm like, all right, these hackathons, they just like whet the appetite of the sales team and then just frankly frustrate them more. Innovation's tough, right? Like but it's critically important. You know, in my space, in the CRM space, customer support space, we came out really innovative in 2015 when we built our product. We knew we were a better Zendesk. We knew we had a whole bunch of a leg up on Salesforce. Like, we knew that. But unfortunately, people then catch up to you, right? So like people started telling our story. People tried to emulate us, even though they did a really, really poor job. Nonetheless, they would say they did it. Now you're sitting there fighting. Well, they don't really do it. They're just saying they do it. And that kind of started to happen over the years. So innovation is you always need to stay ahead of the curve. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about AI, because there's just no way to not talk about AI at this point in time. And in my space, it is clearly ripe for disruption. I know we heard some human in the loop discussions earlier around keeping that important. Some businesses, do think human in the loop's important. We actually do as well, as we're constructing our next gen software. But wow, is like some of the stuff happening in AI pretty magical and is going to continue to be. So, now we're in a interesting arms race around everybody in my space is how do we use AI, right? So now we're all trying to figure out how do we innovate better than the next guys, right? We're all using the same underlying models, right? The coolest open AI or Llama 3 or whatever stuff, right? Like it's all great and we're all using it and we're all trying to stay current. And what we've done is gone back to like super scrappy startup roots again. Like, we've actually carved out SWAT teams that worked on an experiment. So now we're kind of doubling it. And those teams are operating in an incredibly different fashion than our core teams. They don't do Scrum. They don't actually even have dedicated product managers. It's just a team of like pizza box team, for those that know that analogy. It's like a team of 4 with an incredibly smart tech lead that have a mission and a date. And we literally recruit people to this team by saying the next 6 months are going to be hell. You're going to work on really cool stuff. It's not for everybody. Go check with your spouse. If you're into this, that's cool. If not, we respect that too. And that experiment has worked for us. So we're kind of multiplying it right now. But you kind of have to think differently. And that's sort of how we see it, right? As you get bigger, it's inevitable you will go slower. I'm sure you'll all agree, right? The bigger you get, the slower you go. And, we're trying to fight off a bunch of, small startups that are all trying to do cool AI customer support stuff right now. And they're in their niche world, they're doing cool stuff. They can't do everything we do, but we're fighting off. So you got to think differently, right? And you got to work differently and operate differently. And that's what we're doing. We're excited to see the results of that, and we're going to start multiplying that. Samir?
Absolutely. One of my favorite things about this panel is it feels a little therapeutic. Everything that either of the guys says, I'm like, yes,
Yep.
been there,
Been there,
experienced
done that,
that, literally word for word. But I think to the point that Brad just made, same situation for us. This is my 9th year doing a Susu. We're around 200 plus employees now. And it's just like a totally different landscape than what it was in the early days. And it's almost incumbent upon, more than anyone, actually, I think this is where founders stay really relevant over long term, is to continue to inject that DNA of innovation and almost like dissatisfaction, right? It's very easy for people to get really comfortable with the status quo and think that their job is just, moving the sprint ticket up one, or jumping on 12 calls a day on Zoom and talking about things, and not really realizing that that's not actually moving the ball forward in a material way, right? And so I think part of our job as company leaders and CEOs is really to push people to always maintain that startup founder sort of DNA and mindset of good isn't good enough. How do we do more? How do we push more? That deadline is 6 months. How do we do it in 3 months, right? And the thing that I actually hate the most is when people sort of get like too focused on our internal reality, right? And so they're sort of like, oh, I'm really tired. This is really painful. I don't want to solve this problem for a customer again. And all of a sudden, everything becomes about what's happening within the organization rather than outside. And so I always also think it's important to kind of make sure that your core team members are exposed to the market. They understand what competitors are doing. They understand what customers are demanding. They understand that, hey, what we're doing isn't good enough. And sometimes people need to hear that from someone other than myself. And so sometimes it's like, hey, you know what? Why don't you talk to a customer, right? Technology leader, product leader, marketing leader, whatever, and actually hear from them, hey, we're being disrupted in our own market. We created the market, but now there's 30 people in there and they're offering the same product and they're saying it's free. And to your point, sometimes it might not even work. But nonetheless, that's what our customers are hearing every single day. And so, you know, and then to make a circular point, since we talked about it already, this is where hiring the right people matters too, right? You need people who understand how to be bar raisers. I think Amazon used to call it that, right? But how do they kind of get the best out of people and push them? Because human nature is just to move towards stagnation. Comfort, ease, stability is what people go towards. And our job is to get them to be out of their comfort zone. And to your point, that experiment, like these 6 months are going to be crazy. You have no idea what it's going to look like, but go for it, right? And you got to push people there because by default, 9 to 5 feels very comfortable. And so your job is to kind of always help people get out of their comfort zone, push the status quo. And that takes a lot of focus and effort and frankly, emotional energy, as I think you were saying earlier. The toughest part of being a founder is just the amount of emotional drain that it takes, but nobody else is going to do it. So you got to be excited about it and show up and always ask, how can we do this better? How can we do it faster? How can we give our customers a 10x experience? And that's really going to help you kind of keep pushing the ball forward.
Yeah, I guess it's the sort of raging debate in Silicon Valley right now is this kind of founder mode thing that's, you know, people are sort of discussing left and right. And I would say, you know, you definitely feel it when the company's larger. And I think that innovation requires sort of a different way of working in addition to a different way of thinking. So, you know, the sort of command and control approaches towards running a business of like the CEO on top with like functional VPs and then different team leaders that are in these different pods and whatnot. It doesn't really work when you're trying to launch something from scratch. And so the sort of innovation mode that I think about is sort of like, you know, the movie industry where, you know, you bring your best SFX people and you bring your best production people and your best set designers and whatever, you have them sort of work on a very specific and defined problem, you know, for a handful of months to get to a very creative outcome and to do it in a very intense manner to get to that sort of final stage. And I guess maybe, you know, for folks who sort of run later stage businesses, the challenge of this approach is that it's in direct contrast to the command and control methods of running a business. And so, you know, in that sort of structure, you know, your finance team, your operating heads, your general managers and whatnot are all incentivized to be against innovation because they have basically their resources that you're drawing from. There's a certain level of risk that's associated with any level of investment. And this is where sort of CEOs, you know, sort of make or break it when it comes to the growth stages, right? So if you read any of the historical books around like Amazon or others, you know, in 2002, 2007, Amazon was like in the real gutter. I mean, it was like the company was just grinding it through, barely eking out growth, you know, year over year. And then, of course, if you read about sort of the origin stories of like AWS as an example, you know, AWS was like this business that Bezos personally cultivated inside of Amazon. And you read the stories and like his entire senior leadership team resign over the course of like several years. You had multiple executives pushing back. You had the entire finance team and all of Wall Street sort of bearing down on you. And it's like, that's the sort of level of conviction you need to have basically to push through innovation. And it's usually because you're sort of grounded in some level of like customer truth or market truth or some conviction around technology that you have. But innovation is not easy, particularly when you're trying to kind of create that like second or third or fourth wave of growth. And that's really where sort of like, you know, the requirements around making decisions as a CEO are intricately important, and you just need a lot of conviction to do that over time.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. As we're slowly approaching the end of the panel, my last question for all the panelists is about kind of startup ecosystem and startup ecosystems and accelerators in general. And of course, today we're launching our NJ Fast program here in Hoboken. What have been your experience with different accelerators in the early stages? Would you recommend startups joining them? And what has been the biggest value that you draw out from all of those? Brad, do you want to start?
Sure. So we didn't really, we worked with Plug and Play, but we didn't really take advantage of much of an accelerator. We had great partners and great investors. They helped us not only with their capital. I always tell our investors the capital is the least valuable thing they ever provide to me. And that was who I was surrounding myself with, great advisors. And that's sort of what I think enabled, Kustomer to get started. We personally were not deep in an incubator per se. But I know it works really well for so many other organizations. It just wasn't how we began.
Yeah, so we similarly were not part of the Accelerator program directly, but did work with Plug and Play, and it's been a tremendous experience. And something that I enjoy particularly about Plug and Play versus sort of other models, not that that was the question though, is that it's a little more practical in terms of bringing together industry partners, potential customers, et cetera. And for me, any accelerator, the most valuable thing you can actually do is help me grow the business, right? It's not teaching me about how to do Google search words. Like most founders by nature like to figure things out and do things. And so I've always felt that sort of conundrum with a lot of the accelerator programs out there, which end up being a little more education oriented and a little less practical. And so, I do think that the best that you get out of an accelerator is when it's really all about helping you build your business, making customer introductions, helping you find talent, actually digging in the weeds and solving business problems. Personally, I also think accelerators are more helpful for first-time founders than multiple-time founders because you sort of have some of that networks built in play. And I think I previously started a company, and so we weren't really as necessarily keen to jump into an accelerator. But I will say the value that Plug and Play provides on the business development side is something that I think is pretty unique, and probably what I would do an accelerator for is the customer and revenue growth more than anything else.
So I will be the poster boy for Plug and Play here. I really enjoyed being part of Plug and Play's incubator. So we're as I mentioned, first time founders. We were coming out of college, starting our businesses, and I remember being in Plug and Play's office in Sunnyvale and working with the team, getting introduced to the startup ecosystem. When we started our company, I mean, we literally knew nothing. I mean, you didn't know a single person. I mean, literally. Like we bought a one-way ticket to Silicon Valley. We didn't know how to even get an apartment, so we were like looking on Craigslist. And the Plug and Play team actually helped us find an apartment, which is great. But we were working out of their office. I remember, we were just so out of it. I mean, we made up these like $50 business cards, and we would just print them out and cut them out. And we go to these networking events to just try and meet as many people as possible. Those like sort of dinky networking events at the back of a bar where they have like really cold nachos and whatever. But we go to hundreds of those events to try to meet people. But that's sort of how we built up our kind of network and the like. And so Plug and Play actually was helpful was, both certainly the business development piece, which is critically important in the beginning for sure, but also just getting introduced to the ecosystem, meeting other founders, meeting other investors, institutional investors, and just getting advice, I think was very practically important. And so, recently I've been, doing a lot of angel investing and have co-founded a number of other businesses after Fiscal Note, and each one of them, I encourage them to start working with Plug and Play in some form or fashion. Given also just one practical thing about Plug and Play is the sort of broad corporate network that Plug and Play has access to. And so if you're particularly in B2B or enterprise, I don't know how it is in consumer, but B2B enterprise, it is so hard to get in front of a C-level Fortune 1000 executive to go talk about your company. I mean, it's like, just networking your way in and then, scheduling a meeting and getting to the pitch is like a 6 to 9 month process. And so if you can shortcut that, that's worth a lot for sure. And that, I think that in and of itself is kind of valuable enough to be in the ecosystem.
Wonderful. And on that note, we'll be wrapping up the panel. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me.